Diagwit, Daniel Manning with Japan Forward, and today I'm joined in the studio by renowned Japanese sword expert Paul Martin. He's just hacked and slashed his way in here. There's blood and bodies all over the floor. We'll save it for the blooper reel. So Paul, welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much.
So the first question I have for you today is, why Japanese swords? So what was it about Japanese swords that so captivated you?
I actually had an introduction to Japanese culture through karate. My father practiced karate when I was very young, so I wanted to do it. So then as I was growing up, I was encouraged to watch Kurosawa movies and Takara Ken-san and things like this. So that was my in, and obviously I saw swords on the hips of samurai, in movies that were very cool weapons. But then eventually I became a security guard at the British Museum in London, and I saw swords up close for the first time. And they had great explanations, so they was historical explanations and their spirituality and that they're, in fact, that there are, not just a mere weapon. And they were very, very beautiful. And I was captivated straight away. At the same time, somebody said to me, "Oh, the man in charge of the Japanese department, he's a Japanese sword specialist." And I was like, "You can do that as a job?" And it just blew my mind, and it just gave me my dream for life,
Okay, so how did that lead you to Japan?
So, obviously I always had a longing to go to Japan, but I didn't have the means to do it. But once after 5 years of being in the security department as a manager, and I transferred to the Japanese department, and I got to take care of the swords themselves under the guidance of the man I was speaking about earlier, Victor Harris. But also part of your duties as a member of the Japanese department was to courier objects backwards and forwards to Japan. So then I got to come to Japan and meet lots of sword specialists and sword craftsmen and study swords at major museums and shrines and things like this.
Okay, so what has your life, your career in Japan been like?
Yeah, it's all very full of serendipity. I mean, from the very beginning, going from a security guard to suddenly being able to go to Japan was kind of wild. And nowadays, when I look back on my life, it's incredible. I've had exhibitions in the United States and been on TV all around the world. The lead specialist on a Japanese TV program for 2 seasons, 2 years, which is unprecedented. So it's kind of surreal to sum it up best, I think.
Okay, so you're a Japan Forward contributor, and you've put out a lot of very interesting articles about the Japanese sword making industry. So what's the current state of sword making in Japan? Like you've written a lot about some of the issues with forgeries and things like that. So could you just tell us a little bit about that?
And speaking of forgeries, there's always been forgeries of Japanese swords within Japan, of fake signatures. They're still genuine Japanese swords, but they have fake signatures. But nowadays, there's kind of lots of replicas or Japanese style swords around the world, and they're very low cost. So it's having an adverse effect on the craft because people are buying cheaper swords from elsewhere instead of purchasing real Japanese swords from modern craftsmen. But so the craft is severely in decline. Everyone has this image of a swordsmith smashing the steel and the sparks going everywhere, but actually there's several other craftsmen involved, including sword polishers, scabbard makers, the handle wrappers, the people that make the collar for the base of the blade. And, it's one team. You can't have Japanese swords without every single one of those crafts. So at the moment there's a severe lack of the collar makers and scabbard makers. So whereas it used to take about a year to order a sword and have it completed, now it's taking like a year and a half, almost 2 years, because the crafts are bottlenecking at those two crafts, so swordsmiths have also gone into decline by about 30% in the last 10 years. And within the existing 200 swordsmiths, only about 30 or 40 of those are making swords full time. The others are making other live blade objects like tools and kitchen knives and things like this, to supplement their income. So it's really in a poor state, and I think that some of that is because most of the orders are going to abroad for cheaper swords, You know, because within Japan, you're not allowed to use those swords. It's against the law. You can only have traditionally made Japanese swords. So everyone who practices martial arts in Japan is only using real Japanese swords or blunt alloy practice ones.
Right.
You know, so yeah, it would be nice to bring the orders back to Japan somehow. But at the same time, the higher class swords are art, and they always have been. You know, there's Kamakura period picture scrolls of generals admiring the beauty of their sword. You know, so the sword has never been merely a weapon. It's always been also viewed as art and also as a spiritual object to support the samurai spirituality and things like this. Or, you know, Japanese people in general. There's all different roles of the sword being given to shrines or making people well from being sick and things like this, kind of exorcisms and things like this. You know, so, but the sword is not generally recognised as art in the art world proper in the West. Obviously in Japan it is, but so, you know, I think they see it more as a weapon than they do as art. And they're very difficult to understand because the art of Japanese swords, the blade itself, is quite abstract. The outside is, you know, kind of man-made in comparison. You know, so there's designs and images and things that people can relate to. But the beauty of the steel itself is kind of something that has a unique Japanese taste to it, you know, and you have to get your head around that and understand it. So it's very difficult, but I think that once Japanese art swords become the next big thing in the art world proper, that the price will soar, you know. So you'll always have starving artists. There's starving artists nowadays in the art world proper, but the people, you know, Banksy and Damien Hirst are making lots of money per item, you know. But you've got starving swordsmiths, but the top line swordsmiths, their price is just going up now, and it's like $100,000 for one sword.
Right.
But that's nothing compared to the other artists, you know.
Yeah, I never thought I'd hear Damien Hirst and Japanese swordsmiths mentioned in the same sentence.
I'd love for him to paint a scabbard for me.
So, on that point, who buys Japanese swords and what determines the price?
Yeah, so the price is greatly differentiated by whether it's for martial arts use or whether it's for art, as said previously. So martial arts use, you know, it has a lower level of art polish applied to the blade. So, you know, because they're going to be used and scratched, maybe for cutting or just for kata, for iaido and things like this. So, you know, those swords you can get from anywhere between $5,000 to $12,000-$20,000, fully mounted.
Right.
You know. But the art swords, the price is going up at the moment as I speak. But that price was kind of standardised by people who worked independently or people who were entering competitions and were taking prizes in competition, like first prize and things like this, so their price would go up. But the standardised price for what's called Master Swordsmith, there's different names for different groups, but overall Master Swordsmith was about $30,000, and it stayed the same for a very long time. But recently people have started breaking away and putting their prices up.
Right.
And then suddenly it's jumped up to $100,000 in some cases.
Okay. So just a kind of brief aside, if you will. There's a lot of TV programs, anime, that, you know, from my perspective, are probably, you know, helping to draw more attention to the world of Japanese swords and Japanese sword making. But do you ever see any of these programs, like Shogun, for example, and the way swords are represented, or, you know, how they're being used? You know, you just kind of go, like, what are they doing?
Most, you know, obviously it's mostly fantasy. So,
yeah.
But swords were never the primary weapon in the first place. You know, they were very seldom used, and all the broken swords don't exist anymore. So they, you know, so most of the swords that survive were very seldom used, very in great condition, and things like this. But, you know, in general, the sword movies, you know, or the samurai movies and things like this, they do strange things. They make a strange sound as they draw the sword, shing,
right,
and then they go gaching like this when they, you know. But that means that all your fittings are loose, and your blade is going to probably fly out the handle or something when you use it. So in many cases, there are some good examples, and not that the Last Samurai was a good example, but there was an actual real swordsmith who played the part of the swordsmith in it. You know.
Okay. So just to come back to your point about the current state of sword making and the sword making industry in Japan, are there any government incentives at the moment to kind of ameliorate or improve the situation? Because, You would think that it would be in Japan's interest to preserve Japanese swords as an art or as a cultural property. So
no, at the moment we're hoping, because there's different political groups that support craftsmen and swords the preservation of swords in general. And one of the other problems that I didn't mention earlier is the price of charcoal.
Okay.
Now the price of charcoal has gone up to 5 times its original price from 10 years ago.
Right.
And it was affected by the great earthquake of 2011. It wiped out lots of areas of pine trees and things like this, and charcoal making places. So the price of charcoal is the same for the smiths that can't really eat and the master smiths. So has a very tough effect. Some swordsmiths feel like they're just burning money straight into the fire, So the different groups are trying to lobby the government, but there's no actual incentive from the government at the moment. It's become a bit of a tourist boom at the moment, visiting to swordsmiths and sword events and things like this,
right.
Samurai experience and all these things. So that's having an effect. And certain cities are making more of an effort to cities that are associated with sword making are making an effort to promote their sword making history and skills abroad. So they're trying to look for exhibitions abroad, things like this.
Right. So given all that, do you ever worry about the future of Japanese sword making?
Oh, absolutely.
Do you worry that, about whether there's going to be anybody left, in 10 years' time, say?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a worry. Like I said, if just one of those crafts disappears, the whole thing will crumble. Because even if somebody makes a sword, you need a polisher to polish it. You need a person to make the collar for it to stay in the scabbard. And this one here, this is a plain wooden sleeping scabbard. This is almost like rocket science, the way it's made, so that the blade doesn't rust and it holds it in a certain place and things like this. So they're very, very specialized skills. And the people that make these things don't only make them for the new swords, they have to renew them for the old swords. So,
right.
it's for the preservation of the old swords as well, So they're very important. Having said that, I don't think there will ever be a Japan without a Japanese swordsmith. I think that somehow they'll survive, but it will go into a boom. There's booms at the moment with lots of young ladies who've suddenly taken a liking to swords, and there's fantasy characters associated. Yeah, there's the online game Tolkien Rambo.
Oh, okay.
And that's expanded into lots of movies and stage plays and everything, But it doesn't have a direct effect on the market of ordering Japanese swords and the craft, But it does shine a light on it, which is very good, I don't. Even after the Edo period into the Meiji period, there was no need for swords anymore, so there was a steep decline. But leading up to the 1930s, there was a reinvigoration of the craft and things like this. And I think that when it comes to the crunch, that Japan will do something, because Japanese swords are so much an integral part of the culture.
Absolutely. So to that end, in your opinion, what are some practical steps or measures, for example, organizations or just Japanese people in general can take to help preserve the culture?
I have one idea. I have a few ideas. One was, as I said, to involve modern artists to paint the scabbards and things, because the outside has always been, you have the internal art of the blade, the external art of the koshirai, so the mountains. So if we can get famous artists to paint the mountains, so that the art world proper has an anchor to hook onto to understand Japanese swords.
A tangible connection.
Yeah. And then we can introduce Japanese swords as proper art into the proper art world. Another thing which saved the craft back in the 1930s and is now taboo, and so this won't be a very popular idea, but the Japan Self-Defense Force has a sword in its badge.
Yes.
But they don't have any swords. So if commissioned officers were allowed to have swords, and they would help to support the craft by sword orders, and that would again reinvigorate the craft. But it wouldn't be a popular decision with our neighbouring countries, I think.
Right. Yeah. So, no choice then, but constitutional reform, right?
Right.
Okay. So, there's one thing we do here on this program is each guest, we get them to come up with a question for the next guest. And our last guest, the question they posed to you was, is there a kind of attitude you have that sort of has helped you with your career in the Japanese sword world, or your life over here in Japan?
Yeah, I think that because it's Japanese swords, that I'm always looking to the past, and that's the way that Japanese swords work as well. You know, they're objects that are made now, so they're influenced by the present, but they're greatly influenced by the past. So whenever I'm thinking about doing things with Japanese swords or my career in general, I'm always looking to the past, but always looking like 200 years to the future as well. You know, because I'm thinking about now how we look at swords in the past now. So I also think about how we would look about swords now in the future. You know,
right.
So most of my projects are to do with that.
Okay, so in our office here, we've had a copy of your book on swords, Japanese swords and sword making. It was in Italian though, so my Italian's a little rusty, so I didn't really understand anything. But this is your book here, a nice English edition. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's a very simple theme. I chose 30 famous samurai that were representative of their period, like throughout samurai history, and the objects that they owned, so that you get a sense of their aesthetic sense. And you know, you get to see different famous samurai and the changes of samurai through the eras. You know, so it kind of tells the history of Japan in a way, through swords and fittings and armor and things like this.
Okay, so do you happen to have any other books or projects kind of in the works?
I do, but I can't reveal the ones I'm working on at the moment. But you know, I've done lots of translations for major museums, exhibitions and things like this, and other sword books that are well known by Japanese sensei and things like this, you know.
Okay, so there's one thing I'm kind of curious about as well, is to what extent is foreign interest in Japanese swords sort of helping to bolster the industry?
Yeah, Japanese sword martial arts and martial arts in general, Japanese martial arts, are spread around the world. You know, I mean, if you go on YouTube, they're not real Japanese swords, but there's people holding Japanese-shaped swords or things that look like them, cutting up lots of things in their back gardens. You know, all around the world. It's amazing, and this is the true power of Japanese swords: the imagery and the spiritual, you know, influence that it has. You know, to make people want things, and you know, or to move people, you know, to move their hearts and minds, you know. So I think that's the true spirit of Japanese swords.
All right. So the last question I have is there anything you would like to ask our next guest, whoever that might be? Any question for them?
Yeah, this was probably the most difficult question actually, but you know, I know that just by being an observer, that you can change a culture slightly. So what do they do to promote or transmit a culture to the world without changing it? You know, without having any influence on it to make it slightly different. And the second part to that is you know, how do they also make it at the same time make it palatable to foreign audiences?
Okay. Well, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
This has been 20 Minutes with Paul Martin. Thank you for watching.